Chapter 21 Struggle for Freedom Second. Let's learn. Emergence of M.K. Gandhi, Lucknow Pact 1916, Montagu-Chelmsford Reforms 1919, Rowlatt Act Jallianwala Bagh Massacre, Khilafat Movement, Non-Cooperation Movement, Peasants' Movement, Revolutionary Movement. Second phase, Dandi March, Civil Disobedience Movement, Quit India Movement, Azad Hind Fauj, Towards Freedom. Emergence of M.K. Gandhi. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi was a lawyer trained in Britain. He went to South Africa in 1893 and resided there for 21 years. The treatment of Indians in South Africa by the white rulers pricked his conscience. He decided to fight against the policy of racial discrimination of the South African government. During the course of his struggle against the government, he evolved the technique of satyagraha, insistence on truth. Gandhi succeeded in this struggle in South Africa. He returned to India in 1915. In 1916, he founded the Sabarmati Ashram at Ahmedabad to practice the ideas of truth and non-violence. Gopal Krishna Gokhale advised him to tour the country, mainly in the villages, to understand the people and their problems. He took the advice and travelled across India. Gandhiji realized that a crucial part of freedom movement has to be major reformation in Indian society. His first experiment in satyagraha began at Champaran in Bihar in 1917, when he inspired the indigo farmers to struggle against the oppressive plantation system. He also organized a satyagraha to support the peasants of the Kheda, Kaira district of Gujarat, and was able to get their taxes waived as the crops had failed. These peasants were not able to pay their revenue because of crop failure and epidemics. In Ahmedabad, he organized a movement amongst cotton mill workers for better wages and succeeded. Gandhiji had become the most popular leader in India by 1919. Common people became actively involved in numerous mass movements that were organized under his leadership. These movements had the following features: non-violent demonstrations, non-payment of taxes, boycott of courts, educational institutions, picketing of shops selling foreign goods, non-violent defiance of law. Info Hive. Annie Besant was elected president of Theosophical Society. She had founded the Central Hindu College in Banaras, where boys lived like monks and received a spiritual education. Lucknow Pact of 1916. Lucknow Pact was an important landmark in India's struggle for freedom, as it brought the extremist and moderate sections of Indian National Congress together under one common interest for obtaining self-rule for the Indians. The Congress and the Muslim League also came together to fight for self-rule. Mahatma Gandhi emerged as a national leader. He advocated the use of satyagraha to fight the British. His social agenda included the removal of untouchability, the revival of village crafts, and the popularization of charkha and khadi. Montagu-Chelmsford Reforms of 1919. In order to pacify Indians, the Montagu-Chelmsford Reforms were proposed in 1919. It is also known as Government of India Act. Some of the important provisions of the Act were: this Act made the central legislature bicameral. The first house, which was the central legislature with 145 members, 104 elected and 41 nominated, was Imperial Legislative Assembly, and the second with 60 members, 33 elected and 27 nominated, was called Council of States. The term of the Assembly was fixed for 3 years and the Council for 5 years. The powers of the houses remained more or less the same. It introduced diarchy, which was a kind of double government in the provinces. The provisional government was to be divided into two parts, reserved and transferred. Matters like finance and police, which the British considered more important, were put in the reserved list. These were under the governor and his council. Subjects like education and public health, which the British considered less important, were put in the transferred list, for which the concerned ministers were responsible. Real power remained with the British. The report also laid stress on the Indianization of the services. These reforms did not satisfy political demands in India. The British repressed opposition and re-enacted the restrictions on the press and on movements. It was seen as a betrayal of strong support by Indians for the British war efforts. Hence, the act disappointed the Indians and protests broke out across the country. Rowlatt Act 1919. In 1917, a committee was set up under the presidentship of Sir Sidney Rowlatt to look into the militant nationalist activities. On the basis of its report, the Rowlatt Act was passed in March 1919 by the Central Legislative Council. As per this act, any person could be arrested on the basis of suspicion and imprisoned without trial. No appeal or petition could be filed against such arrests. This act was called the Black Act and it was widely opposed. An All India Hartal strike was organized on April 6, 1919. Meetings were held all over the country. April 6, 1919 was observed as the National Humiliation Day. It was a non-violent opposition and the beginning of India's struggle against the British government. Jallianwala Bagh Massacre, 13 April 1919. Mahatma Gandhi was arrested near Delhi. Two prominent leaders of Punjab, Dr. Satyapal and Dr. Saifuddin Kichlu, were arrested on 10 April 1919 in Amritsar. The Rowlatt Act also banned Indians from keeping any type of weapon. This angered the Sikhs, who kept a kripan, a small type of small sword, with them as part of their religious beliefs. On 13th April 1919, on the occasion of Baisakhi fair at Jallianwala Bagh, Amritsar, people organized a peaceful general meeting to protest against the act and the arrests. Suddenly, a British officer, General Dyer, entered the park with his troops and ordered them to open fire on the crowd with their machine guns. This was done without any warning to the people. The Jallianwala Bagh gates were closed and the people, men, women and children could not escape to safety. Within a few minutes, about 1,000 people were killed and many more thousands critically injured. The massacre aroused the fury of the Indian people. Showing his anger and pain, the famous philosopher-poet Rabindranath Tagore returned his knighthood to the British government. Martial law was declared in Punjab, people were tortured and newspapers were banned. These repressive measures fueled people's anger against British oppression. Info Hive. On Partition Day in Calcutta on October 16, 1905, Rabindranath Tagore began the Rakhi Bandhan tradition of tying a thread around the wrist of another Bengali as a symbol of friendship. Khilafat agitation. The chief cause of the Khilafat movement was the defeat of Turkey, which fought against the British in the First World War. The harsh terms of the Treaty of Sevres in 1920 were felt by the Muslims as a great insult to them. The whole movement was based on the Muslim belief that the Caliph, the Sultan of Turkey, was the religious head of the Muslims all over the world. The Muslims in India were upset over the British attitude against Turkey and launched the Khilafat movement. Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, M.A. Ansari, Saifuddin Kichlu and Ali brothers were the prominent leaders of this movement. A Khilafat committee was formed on 19th October 1919 and the whole country observed the Khilafat Day. On 23rd November, a joint conference of the Hindus and the Muslims was also held under the chairmanship of Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi was particularly interested in bringing the Hindus and the Muslims together to wrest the country's independence from British rule. Subsequently, the Khilafat movement merged with the non-cooperation movement launched by Mahatma Gandhi in 1920. The non-cooperation movement 1920 to 22. Mahatma Gandhi announced his plan to begin non-cooperation with the government as a sequel to the Rolak Act, Jallianwala Bagh massacre, and the Khilafat movement. It was approved by the Indian National Congress at the Nagpur session in December 1920. The objectives of the non-cooperation movement were surrender of titles and honorary positions, resignation of membership from the local bodies, boycott of elections held under the provisions of the 1919 Act, boycott of government functions, boycott of courts, government schools and colleges, boycott of foreign goods, establishment of national schools, colleges and private panchayat courts, popularizing Swadeshi goods and khadi, homespun cloth. Later it was supplemented with a constructive program which had these principal features: promotion of Swadeshi, particularly hand-spinning and weaving, removal of untouchability among Hindus, promotion of Hindu-Muslim unity, spread of education. The movement began with Mahatma Gandhi renouncing the titles which were given by the British. Other leaders and influential persons also followed him by surrendering their honorary posts and titles. Students came out of the government educational institutions. National schools such as Kashi Vidyapeeth, the Bihar Vidyapeeth, and the Jamia Millia Islamia were set up. All the prominent leaders of the country gave up their lucrative legal practice. Legislatures were boycotted. No leader of the Congress came forward to contest the elections for the legislatures. At several places, bonfires of foreign clothes were organized. In 1921, mass demonstrations were held against the Prince of Wales during his tour to India. The government resorted to strong measures of repression. Many leaders were arrested. The Congress and the Khilafat committees were proclaimed as illegal. The message of Swadeshi spread everywhere. Most of the households took to weaving cloth with the help of charkhas. But the whole movement was abruptly called off on 11th February 1922 by Gandhi following the Chauri Chaura incident in Gorakhpur district of UP. Earlier on 5th February, a crowd of peasants was leading a protest march through the village. The police beat up volunteers picketing shops. This agitated the peasants, and the angry mobs set fire to the police station at Chauri Chaura, and 22 policemen were burnt to death. Mahatma Gandhi was strictly against any violence, and he immediately withdrew the movement. Many top leaders of the country were stunned at this sudden suspension of the non-cooperation movement. M.K. Gandhi was arrested at Ahmedabad on March 18, 1922, and sentenced to 6 years simple imprisonment. The non-cooperation movement failed to achieve success, yet it succeeded in preparing a platform for the future movements. After taking back the non-cooperation movement, M.K. Gandhi and his followers were busy giving the message to the people to end caste-based animosity among themselves. Brain tickler. In 1922, M.K. Gandhi suspended his non-cooperation movement after the Chauri Chaura incident, even when the movement was at its peak. Did he take the right decision? Significance of non-cooperation movement. It was the first real mass movement with the participation of different sections of Indian society, such as peasants, workers, students, teachers, and women. It witnessed the spread of nationalism to the remotest corners of India. It also marked the height of Hindu-Muslim unity as a result of the merger of the Khilafat movement with it. It demonstrated the willingness and ability of the masses to endure hardships and make sacrifices. Non-cooperation to civil obedience. C.R. Das, Motilal Nehru, and other like-minded persons hashed out a novel plan of non-cooperation from within the reformed councils. They formed the Swaraj Party on January 1, 1923. C.R. Das was the president of the party and Motilal Nehru the secretary. The party was described as a party within the Congress and not a rival organization, but they could neither end nor amend the Act of 1919. Peasant movements. Since the establishment of the British rule in India, many peasant revolts had taken place. Peasants were an active component during the non-cooperation movement. Kisan Sabhas fought against the British and the zamindars, who were their agents. In 1928, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel led the Bardoli Satyagraha, protesting the increase in taxes that the peasants had to pay. Gandhiji too associated himself closely with the peasants. Revolutionary movement, second phase. Upon the withdrawal of the non-cooperation movement, revolutionary activities recommenced with a renewed fervour. The revolutionaries formed the Hindustan Republic Association, HRA, in 1924. In 1925, a group of revolutionaries took away government money from a train at Kakori near Lucknow to finance their anti-British operations. Similar incidents occurred sporadically during this period. In 1928, a British police officer, Saunders, was assassinated by the revolutionaries as he had ordered the lathi charge a few months earlier, in which Lala Lajpat Rai had died. Revolutionaries like Bhagat Singh felt that socialism ought to be one of their goals, and hence the word socialist was added. Now HRA was called HRSA, or Hindustan Republican Socialist Association. On 8 April 1929, Bhagat Singh and Batukeshwar Dutt threw a bomb in the Central Legislative Assembly to protest against the Public Safety Bill and the arrest of 31 labour leaders. The bomb was harmless and no one was injured. Both surrendered after shouting anti-British slogans. Bengal was aflame with revolutionary sentiments, and young men targeted unpopular magistrates and police officers. In 1930, 3 young activists, Benoy Bose, Badal Gupta and Dinesh Gupta, killed the Inspector General of Prisons. Surya Sen was a firebrand Bengali revolutionary who set up the Indian Republic Army. On April 8, 1930, he, along with other revolutionaries, attacked and looted the police armory at Chittagong to obtain arms for revolutionaries. He was subsequently arrested and hanged. Women also played an important part in revolutionary activities, working as messengers, sheltering revolutionaries, and sometimes even attacking British officers. Preeti Lata Vadedar became a martyr in the cause of freedom struggle. This revolutionary movement lost momentum after the British bore down heavily on them. Bhagat Singh, Rajguru and Sukhdev were hanged on March 23, 1931. Chandrasekhar Azad died fighting the British at Allahabad, and the age of revolutionaries came to an end. Simon Commission 1927. In 1927, the British government appointed a commission under the chairmanship of Sir John Simon. The commission was appointed to study the reforms of 1919 and suggest further measures for constitutional reforms. The commission had no Indian member in it. The Indians boycotted this all-white commission. Therefore, when this commission arrived in India on 4 February 1928, it faced protests all over the country. Black flags were shown, demonstrations and hartals, strikes took place all over the country, and the cry of "Simon, go back!" was heard. These demonstrators were lathi-charged at a number of places by the British police. Lala Lajpat Rai was severely assaulted by the police, and he succumbed to his injuries. This agitation against the Simon Commission gave a new strength to the national movement of India. Purna Swaraj Resolution. Meanwhile, Indian political leaders were busy in drafting a constitution. This is known as Nehru Report, which formed the outline of the constitution. Among its important recommendations were a declaration of rights, a parliamentary system of government, adult franchise, and an independent judiciary with a Supreme Court at its head. Most of its recommendations formed the basis of the Constitution of Independent India, which was adopted more than 20 years later. At the Congress annual session in 1928, the party passed a resolution demanding dominion status for India and also stressed that if the demand was not met in a year's time, nothing but complete independence would be acceptable to the Indian people. At the historic annual session of Congress in Lahore in 1929, the Congress committed itself to a demand for Purna Swaraj, or complete independence, and issued a call to the country to celebrate 26th January as the Purna Swaraj Day. On January 26, 1930, the Congress celebrated Independence Day. On the same day in 1950, the Constitution of Independent India came into force, making India a sovereign democratic republic. Since then, January 26th is celebrated as the Republic Day. Brain tickler. What is meant by the word republic? Civil disobedience movement 1930 to 1934. Under the supervision of M.K. Gandhi, the Congress approved a new movement called the Civil Disobedience Movement. It started with the Dandi March. Dandi March. Around the same time, the government made a new law. They imposed taxes on the use of salt. This was opposed by the people, as salt was basic need of the people. But no attention was paid to popular demands. During March-April 1930, Gandhi marched from his Sabarmati ashram to Dandi on the Gujarat coast for the purpose of raiding the government salt. The violation of salt law was his first challenge to the government. It was a peaceful march. Gandhi committed a technical breach of the salt law on 6 April 1930 when he picked up the scattered sea salt from the coast to break this law. In this movement, farmers, traders and women took part in large numbers. The government arrested Gandhi in May 1930 and put him in Yerwada jail at Pune. The campaign had a significant effect on British attitude towards Indian independence. Gandhi Irwin Pact in 1931 was one of its examples. M.K. Gandhi also went to London in 1931 and participated in the Second Roundtable Conference as the sole representative of the Congress, but no settlement could be arrived at. Although Gandhi's arrest removed him from the active leadership of the movement, the civil disobedience continued. Special stress was laid on boycott of foreign goods, particularly clothes. The civil disobedience movement, though a failure, was a vital phase in the struggle of freedom. It promoted unity among Indians of different regions under the Congress banner. It provided an opportunity to recruit younger people and educate them for positions of trust and responsibility in the organization as also in provincial administration, which was captured in the 1937 elections. It gave wide publicity to political ideas and methods throughout the country and generated political awareness even in remote villages. First Roundtable Conference of 1930. This was the first ever conference arranged between the British and the Indians as equals. While the Congress and most business leaders boycotted the first RTC, the Muslim League, the Hindu Mahasabha, the liberals and princes attended it. Virtually every delegate reiterated that a constitutional discussion to which the Congress was not a party was meaningless. Also at the conference, the British Prime Minister hinted at an olive branch to the Congress and expressed the hope that the Congress would attend the next RTC. Gandhi-Irwin Pact of 1931. A pact was signed between the Viceroy representing the British Indian government and Gandhi representing the Indian people in Delhi on February 14, 1931. This Delhi Pact, also known as the Gandhi-Irwin Pact, placed the Congress on an equal footing with the British government. Under its terms, the government agreed to release all political prisoners except those charged with acts of violence. The Congress in turn agreed to suspend the civil disobedience movement and participate in the Second Roundtable Conference. Second Roundtable Conference 1931. The Second Roundtable Conference was held in London from 7 September 1931 to 1 December 1931 with the participation of Gandhi and the Indian National Congress. 2 weeks before the conference convened, the Labour government had been replaced by the Conservatives. At the conference, Gandhi claimed to represent all people of India. This view, however, was not shared by other delegates. In fact, the division between the many attending groups was one of the reasons why the outcomes of Second Roundtable Conference were again not substantial regarding India's constitutional future. Meanwhile, civil unrest had spread throughout India again, and upon return to India, Gandhi was arrested along with other Congress leaders. A separate province of Sindh was created, and the interests of minorities were safeguarded by MacDonald's Communal Award. Without a strong leadership, the struggle lost its focus, and Congress withdrew the movement on May 1934. Civil disobedience to quit India, 1934 to 1942. The Government of India Act was passed in August 1935. This act expanded the powers of elected provincial and national legislatures and helped lay the groundwork for full independence. The act continued and extended all the existing features of the Indian Constitution, but in addition, certain new principles were introduced. Provision for the establishment of a Federation of India to be made up of both British India and some or all of the princely states. More than half princely states had to join if a federation was to be made. The grant of a large measure of autonomy to the provinces of British India, ending the system of diarchy introduced by the Government of India Act 1919. The right to vote, however, remained limited. Only 14% people had voting rights. Diarchy was abolished at the provincial level but introduced at the central level. The Viceroy became more powerful and was not responsible to the legislature. The introduction of direct elections, thus increasing the franchise from 7 million to 35 million people. Brain tickler, in whose regime during the British period was Samachar Darpan, the first vernacular paper published. Like this, there were several main features and changes that the Government of India Act 1935 offered. The act was rejected by the Congress. It, however, decided to contest the elections to the provincial legislative assemblies to be held in 1937 and won an absolute majority of seats in 6 provinces. The Second World War started in 1939. Britain involved India in this war without any prior notice. In March 1942, the British government sent Stafford Cripps to India with proposals for a new constitution. These proposals were found unsatisfactory, too little, too late, and were rejected both by the Congress and Muslim League. Info-Hive. Gandhi termed the Cripps proposals as a post-dated check on a crashing bank. Quit India Movement 1942. On 8 August 1942, Mahatma Gandhi launched the Quit India Movement Bharat Chodo Andolan in Bombay for freedom from British rule. The Quit India Movement, also known as the August Movement, was a civil disobedience movement launched by Gandhi for Purna Swaraj, complete independence. The movement was accompanied by a mass protest on non-violent lines in which Gandhi called for an orderly British withdrawal from India. Through his passionate speeches, Gandhi moved people by proclaiming, "Every Indian who desires freedom and strives for it must be his own guide. Let every Indian consider himself to be a free man." Gandhi declared in his fiery "do or die" speech the day the Quit India Movement was declared. The British were prepared for this massive uprising, and within a few hours of Gandhi's speech, most of the Indian National Congress leaders were swiftly arrested. Most of them had to spend the next 3 years in jail until World War II ended. During this time, the British were deriving heavy support from the Viceroy's Council, Muslims, the Communist Party, princely states, the Indian Army, and the civil services. Most Indian businessmen were reaping rich profits due to the wartime spendings, and hence did not support the Quit India Movement. Most students were drawn towards Subhash Chandra Bose, who was in exile, and the only support Indians got from outside the country was from American President Franklin D. Roosevelt, who persuaded then British Prime Minister Winston Churchill to agree to the demands of the Indians. But the British refused to do so, and said that this would only be possible when World War II ended. Isolated incidents of violence broke out around the country, but the British acted quickly and arrested thousands of people and kept them in jail till 1945. Here is the picture of a march during Quit India movement. Netaji S.C. Bose with Heinrich Himmler in 1943. The reason why it was so easy for British to crush the Quit India movement was because of a weak coordination and no clear-cut plan of action. Despite its flaws, the Quit India movement remained significant because it was during this movement that the British realized that they would not be able to govern India successfully in the long run and began to think of ways they could exit the country in a peaceful and dignified manner. The Indians suffered greatly throughout the Second World War. There was a disastrous famine in Bengal in 1943, in which nearly 40 lakh people perished. Azad Hind Fauj INA, Indian National Army. The struggle for independence was carried on by Subhash Chandra Bose from abroad. He found the outbreak of the Second World War to be a convenient opportunity to strike a blow for the freedom of India. Bose had been put under house arrest in 1940, but he managed to escape to Berlin on March 28, 1941. The Indian community there acclaimed him as the leader Netaji. He was greeted with Jai Hind, salute to the motherland. He tried to raise an Indian army and urged his countrymen to rise in arms against the British. Info Hive. General Mohan Singh was the military leader of the INA, and more than 45,000 soldiers made up its ranks. In 1942, the Indian Independence League was formed by Ras Behari Bose, and a decision was taken to form the Indian National Army for the liberation of India. On an invitation from Ras Behari Bose, Subhash Chandra Bose came to East Asia on June 13, 1943. He was made president of the Indian Independence League and the leader of the INA, popularly called Azad Hind Fauj. He gave the famous battle cry, Chalo Dilli. He promised independence to Indians, saying, Tum mujhe khoon do, main tumhe azadi dunga. You give me blood, I will give you freedom. In March 1944, the Indian flag was hoisted at Kohima. Unfortunately, after that the movement collapsed. What happened to Netaji remains a mystery. It is said that he lost his life in an air crash in August 1945. But it could not be ascertained. The INA continued to occupy an honored place in India's freedom struggle. The intense patriotism of Bose and the soldiers of the INA proved a tremendous source of inspiration for the Indian people. Towards independence and partition. Differences soon arose between the Congress and the Muslim League concerning the powers of the Constituent Assembly, which was to be set up in accordance with the proposals of the Cabinet Mission, which came to India in February 1946. The formation of an interim government was also proposed. The Constituent Assembly was to comprise members elected by the provincial legislatures and the nominees of the rulers of princely states. An interim government headed by Jawaharlal Nehru was formed. In December 1946, the Constituent Assembly began framing a constitution for India. The League rejected the Cabinet Mission plan in the middle of 1946. In September 1946, the Congress formed the government at the centre. The League refused to be a part of it. The Muslim League celebrated this day as a direct action day on 16th August 1946 to demand a separate state of Pakistan. This day is also known for the Great Calcutta Killings. The conflict resulted in widespread communal riots in different parts of India. Thousands were killed in the riots and lakhs of people became homeless. In the meantime, Lord Mountbatten was sent as the Viceroy to India. He put up his plan in June 1947, which included partition of India. The announcement of the partition led to more riots, particularly in Bihar and Punjab. In spite of strong opposition by Gandhi, all the parties agreed to the partition and the India Independence Act 1947 came into being. It created two independent states in the Indian subcontinent, that is Indian Union and Pakistan, comprising West Punjab, Sindh, Northwest Frontier Province and East Bengal. India got its independence on 15th August 1947. At the stroke of midnight, 15th August 1947, transfer of power took place. Within months of achieving freedom, India went into mourning again. On 30 January 1948, Mahatma Gandhi, the architect of India's freedom, was shot dead by Nathuram Godse in New Delhi. Elsewhere in the world, South Africa achieved independence in 1994. South Africans fought a tough battle to gain their independence and eventually won it in 1994. The apartheid policies were the biggest obstacle that prevented the South Africans from gaining their independence. D.F. Malan first introduced apartheid to protect the white citizens and to gain control of the blacks. Apartheid was a policy or system of segregation or discrimination on grounds of race. On May 31, 1961, South Africans were extremely unhappy with their situation and they voted for their independence. However, Hendrik Verwoerd, Malan's successor, did not like the sound of their plan for independence, so he only reinforced the apartheid policy more. This reinforcement led the African National Congress ANC and the Pan-Africanist Congress PAC to get involved because things were extremely unfair and were getting out of hand. Many Africans were killed and tortured. Eventually, these organizations were made illegal because the colonial government did not want them to gain support and become a mega source of power that could possibly threaten their ruling status. They tried to subdue the fire, but they only made it burn brighter because the USA and UK got involved. The South African government only got more upset because of the USA's and UK's involvement, and as a result, they intensified their military actions. South Africa endured many years under apartheid policies. Fortunately, F.W. de Klerk ended apartheid on February 2, 1990. He also allowed organizations like ANC and PAC to officially run again. Nelson Mandela, an ANC leader, was released from prison and was elected to be the first legitimate president on May 10, 1994. The people of South Africa took the first step to this mission on April 1994 when they voted for their country's first ever democratic government. Today, South Africa is a strong democracy where people of both white and black ethnicity live together in harmony in a culturally and ethnically diverse country. Recap. M.K. Gandhi advocated the use of satyagraha to fight the British. His early campaigns were at Champaran, Bihar, Ahmedabad and Khera, Gujarat. His social agenda included the removal of untouchability, the revival of village crafts and the popularization of charkha and khadi. Montagu-Chelmsford reforms introduced diarchy in the provinces. Roll Act was passed in March 1919 by the Central Legislative Council. As per this act, any person could be arrested on the basis of suspicion. No appeal or petition could be filed against such arrests. Jallianwala Bagh massacre, April 13, 1919, aroused the fury of the Indian people. M.K. Gandhi announced his plan to begin non-cooperation with the government as a sequel to the Roll Act, Jallianwala Bagh massacre and the Khilafat movement. C.R. Das, Motilal Nehru and other like-minded persons formed the Swaraj Party on January 1, 1923. Simon Commission was boycotted by the Congress. In 1929, the Congress demanded Purna Swaraj for India. The civil disobedience movement started with the Dandi March. On 8 August 1942, M.K. Gandhi launched the Quit India movement in Mumbai. The government banned the Congress and arrested its leaders. The struggle for independence was carried on by Subhash Chandra Bose from abroad. He promised independence to Indians, saying, "तुम मुझे खून दो, मैं तुम्हें आज़ादी दूंगा." India became independent on 15 August 1947.